Well, thank you, Perry. Thank you, KHTS, for doing this. Thank you, Congressman, for being here. My name's Brian Caforio. I'm running for Congress here. I'm a Southern California native, born and raised. My parents were both public school teachers, and they taught me at a very early age the value of hard work and the benefits of a good public education. And I put those two things together and was able to go to UCLA and Yale Law School, work for a United States federal judge, and then come back to Southern California where I practiced law. And what I saw was a system in which far too many people were being taken advantage of, because the rules have been stacked against them by Washington politicians, and decided instead of doing this one case at a time, let's get in there and try to build a better system. Let's fight for an economy that works for everyone so that women get equal pay for equal work and control their own health care decisions. Let's strengthen and secure Social Security and Medicare so that we fulfill that sacred promise to our seniors, and much more. I look forward to a robust debate and appreciate everybody listening.
Steve?
Well, thank you, Perry. Thanks to KHTS for always being the voice of Santa Clarita. My name is Stephen Knight. It has been my distinct honor to be your representative in Congress for the last almost 2 years, about 23 months. I was born and raised just around this district in Edwards Air Force Base. Spent about 35 years inside this district. Went away to the Army after my high school career, and then came back and started my career in law enforcement with the LAPD. My wife is a nurse that has been working for the last 20 years as a NICU nurse. And my two children, one has graduated from Sac State and one is going to Arizona State right now. And I'm very proud of them. But I'm proud of our record that we have stood up for the issues of the district, the local issues and the issues that are big and bold that we have to talk about in Washington, D.C. So I look forward to a debate about the issues. And thank you very much, Perry.
Thanks, Steve. All right. First question goes to Brian. Brian, a lot has been made of your recent move to the district for running for a seat. Your history in the area, why is that not an obstacle for you for running for Congress and representing the area? You moving here fairly recently.
I've essentially, as I said in my intro, I'm born and raised in Southern California. Went to high school about 50, 60 miles south of here, moved up to L.A. County to go to UCLA, and other than a short detour to go to Yale Law School and then to work for a federal judge in Montana, I've lived in Los Angeles County since then. And my wife and I, after we'd been married a few years, decided where do we want to build a family? Where do we want to live? And you look around and you see the Santa Clarita Valley with great schools, affordable housing, more space, and a safe community. And it's just a wonderful place to be. And this is where Lisa and I are going to live after this election, regardless of what happens. She takes the metro every day down to work. She's a city attorney with the city of Los Angeles. And we look forward to continuing to spend our time here focusing on the issues that really matter to people, like women's equality, strengthening, securing Social Security and Medicare, and fighting for comprehensive immigration reform.
Now you have 30 seconds to ask Steve Knight a question.
Oh, okay. Well, Congressman Knight, given the particular question about local area here and the timing of the day it is, I'm sure you're aware that yesterday was the great Vin Scully's last baseball game ever. For me, as a Southern California native, born and raised, I grew up listening to Vin Scully. He's a true legend. What's your favorite baseball team?
Yeah, so I love baseball. I think it is America's pastime. And I think that Vin Scully's last game yesterday, I think it was exceptional. My favorite team is the Boston Red Sox. I make no bones about it. For a year when my father was in Vietnam, we lived in the Northeast, in Vermont. And when you're in the Northeast, you talk about certain teams, and I got an affinity toward the Boston Red Sox. So when my father was away fighting in Vietnam, I got my connection to the Boston Red Sox, and I've kept it ever since. But I tell you what, if the Dodgers make it to the World Series, they'll be the National League, and I would love if the Red Sox made it, they'd be the American League. And it would be great if Vin Scully came back and did those games.
All right. Well, Brian, you have the option of a 30-second rebuttal on the Dodgers baseball answer.
It would indeed if he came back to do those games, and I'll look forward to rooting against you in that World Series to bring it home for the local Dodgers.
Okay.
All right. Fair enough. Steve, first question for you, the last time we talked, you had mentioned your comments on Social Security as one of your biggest regrets. What did you mean?
Yeah, I made a comment about Social Security in the last debate. I think that the comments after were exactly what I thought of Social Security. Of course, nobody talked about those comments, but they talked about the one little soundbite that I said. But I think if you look at my record on Social Security, and you look at what we've done on Social Security and what we've done on Medicare, I have a stellar record. In fact, I'm one of the congressmen who have endorsed and co-authored a bill that will increase benefits for all Social Security recipients next year. Now, I know that hasn't been talked about too much in the media, but that is a bill that is moving quickly in Congress, and I'm one of the co-authors. So one soundbite I don't think defines you, but I think a record of what you've done for that issue, I think that should define you.
And now you have up to 30 seconds to ask Mr. Caforio a question about the topic.
Yeah, I don't have any questions on this topic.
Okay. So, well, Brian, I'll always go ahead and ask then, as far as the Social Security on the topic, your campaign obviously has made some discussion of those comments. So I want to go ahead and give you a minute, and then you can have a 30 seconds rebut.
Sure. I agree with the congressman that you should look at a person's entire record. And that's why I think it's important for people to know that the Alliance of Retired Americans, an organization whose sole goal is to look out for the interests of retired Americans, gives Congressman Knight an 11% rating out of 100 in his entire career for his consistent bad votes for seniors. That includes voting to turn Medicare into a voucher program, ending the Medicare guarantee. It includes his statements where he said both on this very radio station that he's not a fan of Social Security, and then at our debate that he thinks Social Security was a bad idea. Now, I think Social Security was a great idea. It has brought tens of millions of Americans out of poverty. Still today, it brings 2 to 3 million children out of poverty. This is a great program and something we need to strengthen and secure for decades ahead and future generations.
All right. And like I said, Steve, if you want the option of a 30-second.
Sure. If we're going to talk about statements that were made, let's talk about the last debate where my opponent said he doesn't want to do anything to Social Security, which means if the Democrat caucus is wrong, if the Republican caucus is wrong, if the nonpartisan reports that come out every year are wrong about Social Security needing some changes, then he is wrong. What I have said is Social Security should be viable for future generations and strengthened for this generation. That is what I have said all along. I made one statement, but right after that, my opponent said, I don't want any changes to Social Security. So if you're not going to make any changes, you know that it is going to diminish and it is going to have less benefits in the future, but you're okay with that.
Okay. And the next question will go to Brian. Obama's veto of a recent bill allowing families to sue over 9/11 appeared to receive bipartisan support in the 25th, with statements from both of you in support. However, recently, in the past days, there's been some walking that back. Brian, where do you stand on the veto, and does this make us vulnerable to foreign interests?
I'll get to that in a second. I want to respond to a false statement the congressman just made. I've actually made very clear that we do need to make changes to strengthen and secure Social Security. I actually published an op-ed in the Signal, and I believe with you guys, if we lift the cap, we can increase benefits and fully fund Social Security for another 6 decades. That's what I've called for. It's on my website. It's been published in a paper. And so it's unfortunate to hear the congressman make statements like that. With regards to the veto, I agree with Congressman Knight's vote. We need to stand with the families of 9/11 victims. And when or if there is evidence that the government of Saudi Arabia was complicit or involved in these attacks, then they should be held accountable. And I am going to continue to stand with people in our community and other victims of terrorism as we move forward.
Okay, and then now you have the option of asking Steve Knight a question on the topic.
I think we can stick with the question that you asked, which is just whether he regrets his vote or whether he stands behind it and why.
No, that was a very easy vote. I was very firm on the first vote. I was firm on the second vote. There was no ambiguity there. I think that was very easy.
All right, well, then we'll just move right along. Steve, this question is for you, and it has to do with a topic that we've talked about in the past, which is the congressional approval rating. It's pretty low, and what can we do about it?
Well, we've got to do better. There's no doubt about that. I think that when you look at approval ratings for individual congressional members in districts, it's much higher. But overall, Congress has got a very, very low approval rating. And I think that there's been some difficulty over the last 7 and even longer, 7 years or longer, of working with the executive branch and Congress. So I make no bones about it. I don't write bills for Republicans. I don't write bills for Democrats. I write bills for the American people. And that's why we work on aerospace issues. That's why we work on small business. That's why we work on veteran issues. Because if you were just talking to your neighbor and you didn't know what their party affiliation was, and you talked about those 3 issues, they would agree that all of them need to be strengthened. So that's what we do. We try not to be partisan. We try and be proactive to help the American people and help the 25th.
And now you have the opportunity for a question for Brian, or I can ask him the question.
Go ahead, Perry.
By all means.
Why congressional approval rating is so low?
And what can we do about it?
It's so low because Washington is broken. There are a bunch of Washington politicians who just created a dysfunctional system where they're looking out for their biggest donors and special interest instead of the people back home. Unfortunately, it's hard for people to cut through the noise and see what's actually happening in D.C. for the specific votes their members make. So you had a situation in March, for example, where Congressman Knight gave an interview with the Ventura County Star, where he said in the interview that he wanted to prevent suspected terrorists from purchasing firearms, and then he flew back literally the next day and voted for the 10th, 11th, 12th, not sure, time to let suspected terrorists continue purchasing firearms. That's what's wrong with Washington. When people say one thing in the district, they go back and do another. That's why approval rating's so low. And the way you fix that is you get people out of office who refuse to stand up for the people in the community.
Okay. And you have a 30-second rebuttal period?
Yeah, I think that it's very easy when you've never been a part of an organization, you've never led, you've never been elected, you've never been a Rotarian, a Kiwanis, anything, and then you decide that, hey, one day I just want to run for office. But other people have actually been parts of the community, and now we've led the community. So I think what you're talking about is a list that has suspected terrorists on there and also has American citizens that didn't have the due process of law. So when we're not going to have that, when we're not going to have the due process of law for American citizens, then I have a problem with that.
All right. Brian, this next question is for you. Speaking of communities, immigration continues to be an issue that divides neighborhoods, the district, and much of the country. What would be your actual plan to address the concerns about what many consider a failed system, and the plan to deal with the population that's already here, whether illegally or not?
I fight for families, and I support comprehensive immigration reform. I worked for a federal judge, and almost half of the cases you deal with on the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals are immigration cases. And you see very clearly how broken the system is, but still you see how many people want to come to this country because we provide such great hope. And we need to cut through that dysfunction in Washington to create a pathway to citizenship, to make sure that people who have otherwise followed the law, learn English, are productive members in our community, can become citizens. And this isn't just the morally right thing to do, to keep families together, to fight for families, but the Budget Office, who's conducted an analysis of this, said that it will reduce the deficit by $900 billion if we pass comprehensive immigration reform. And so that's one thing I'm going to work on when I'm in Congress.
And your question for Mr. Knight?
Congressman Knight, it was reported in the AV press a few years back that you have no problem telling a child that you can stay in this country, but your parents are going to have to go home. What makes you think it's okay to break apart families like that?
Well, again, we are going to have debates where someone who's never done anything is going to ask somebody who's been leading for the last 10 years to talk about their issues. So that's what we'll do. Immigration, we do have to fix it. And I think in the context of that article, it was very clear of what I was talking about. We have to fix immigration, and we've worked to fix immigration. But the first thing has got to be the border's got to be stronger. It can't be as porous as it is today because we found that out in 1986. The second thing we have to do is we have to make it easier so we understand what legal and illegal immigration is. Because right now, what's happening is people are trying to come into this country and they're paying lawyers $3,000, $5,000, $10,000, money that they don't have. The attorneys are taking it, and then they're not doing what the people need. So if we're going to do immigration reform, then let's do that. Let's make the border stronger, and let's talk about what's legal and what's illegal.
You have 30 seconds to respond.
Yeah, I found that response interesting. Congressman Knight didn't backtrack on his statements that he has no problem deporting the parents of American citizens. I do. I am going to fight for families. And I think we need to make sure we have representatives in Washington who are going to fight for families, who are going to let immigrants serve in the military, as Congressman Knight voted against, and who are going to make sure we're moving our whole communities forward and not just those special interests that donate to their campaign.
All right. Thank
Can
you.
I respond?
We're just going to keep moving on, but you will have time in the closing statement, and you'll be able to respond to anything that was said or you felt was unfinished. Campaign contributions. Both of you have taken heat, as many candidates do, from where money comes from for the election. What can we do to address what many feel is undue influence from outside corporations in Congress?
Yeah, I think that there can be a lot of things that we can do. But if we're going to talk about outside corporations, then let's talk about unions, too. Let's talk about unions who are going to pump tons of money into campaigns without hardly any laws restricting them, and they can do what they want, but other entities can't. So if we're going to have that, let's have a comprehensive. Let's talk about everyone who puts money into campaigns, and that would include corporations, that would include unions, that would include everyone.
Any question for?
Well, I think the question on that is that less than 3% of your donations have come from outside the district. And so people who want to know that you're part of the district and that you've moved in here a month ago and that you want to be a part of what's going on here, can you tell us that why is there only 3% that's come from the district?
First off, that's just simply false. We get a lot of contributions that are under the $200 reporting threshold that simply don't get reported. And in fact, we're proud that our average contribution overall is about $50. Congressman Knight's first quarter in Congress, he actually received $0 from the district. But what he has received since being in office are 70% of his money coming from PACs and corporations. He's taken over $25,000 from oil and gas companies just since being in Congress. In his entire career, he's taken almost or over actually $15,000 from Sempra Energy Company, making it one of the top 10 largest contributors of his entire career in the state legislature. Remember, this is the company who was responsible for the Porter Ranch gas leak, where Congressman Knight refused to stand up for people in the community and instead sided with one of his biggest donors.
All right, moving right along. Brian, where might you differ from the traditional party lines for the Democratic Party?
What's interesting is we see as we move forward, parties are changing. You see a wide variety of positions for both parties. I am firmly against TPP, for example. It's one thing that President Obama is pushing very strongly. And I think we need to, vote against that. It's bad environmentally. It's bad for jobs. And I'm strongly opposed. I'm also opposed to the sometimes knee-jerk reaction by some people on the left to cut the military. I think we need to make sure that we are absolutely funding our military to the extent necessary to protect our national security. That is the number one job of a federal government, and I am going to make sure we are providing all resources necessary in order to protect our country.
Okay. And Steve?
Well, I think I've made it very clear. I think it's interesting that a candidate would say that he's going to vote against something that is still being worked out in Congress. So he's made it very clear that he's going to vote against a major piece of legislation, a major agreement that is going to come up in front of Congress in the next few months, but is not worked out, is not even close to worked out, but he's already made up his mind. I find it interesting that he admitted that I get more than 30% of my money from the district, and he says he gets 3% of his money from the district unless they're low contributors, which you can report if you'd like to. So you can show us all of those contributors that would bring you up to maybe 4%. But I think that my record is very, very clear. And you can see that most of my bills, almost all of my bills, are co-authored by Democrat congressional members. I was the one in the Senate that passed more legislation for veterans than any other Republican.
And I'm sorry, Steve, I hate to interrupt anyone, but we do have to take a quick commercial break.
Do I get my 30-second rebuttal first?
Can we do a 30-second? Yeah, absolutely. Sorry.
Yeah, so first off, again, that's simply a false statement. It's not that 30% of his money comes from the district. It's 30% come from individuals. 97% of my contributions come from individuals. But if we want to talk about local support, I'm actually endorsed by more local appointed and elected officials, current and former, than Congressman Knight. You can check our websites on that.
I'm also proud to be endorsed
I'm also proud to be endorsed by local nurses who I was just walking the picket line at AV Hospital last week, who invited me there to stand with them because their elected representatives aren't standing with them. But local nurses, local teachers, local construction workers, they stand with me.
Thank you for that. I appreciate it. And we're going to have to take a quick commercial break. We'll be right back with this 25th Congressional District debate with Congressman Steve Knight and Challenger Brian Caforio. We'll be right back on your hometown station, AM-1220 KHTS. Welcome back, Santa Clarita Valley. We're here for the 25th Congressional District debate live with Congressman Steve Knight to my right and Challenger Brian Caforio to my left. Thank you again, gentlemen, for coming down here.
Thank you.
Steve, it's your turn to answer the question. The Los Angeles area has been at the forefront of the minimum wage battle, and the city and the county have seen drastic wage hikes. Some feel this is making California less competitive, and others feel that a federal solution now is the only way to make things fair for California business owners. In light of the state's position, would you support raising the minimum wage federally?
Yes, so there is a federal minimum wage. There is a state minimum wage. Our state minimum wage is currently at $10. So our state minimum wage is one of the highest in the union. And it does make us a little bit less competitive with other surrounding states. We've seen that. We've also seen that some cities have jumped it up to absolutely the highest limit, and that would be $15. $15, it has been proven that you have taken the competitiveness out of the area, and they can't compete with areas that are close to them or businesses that are close to them. You can look at studies coming out of Seattle, studies coming out of San Francisco. They enumerate how the restaurant industry has taken such a huge hit on this $15 an hour. I think that if we're going to do something at the federal level, we can move that up. Absolutely. It moves up all the time. My first job as a minimum wage is $3.35. It's not that today. So you do have to move that up, but you have to be competitive. You can't move it up to a level that will kill businesses or kill opportunities.
And you have a question for Brian, or can I throw the same question?
You can throw the same question.
So I support the $15 minimum wage at a federal level. When in 1968, the federal minimum wage was worth the equivalent of approximately $10.50. It's now $7.25. It's 30% lower now. And that's why people are feeling it in their pocketbook. They feel like they're working longer hours and making less money because they are. And that's wrong. And I support making sure that everyone who puts in a full day's work gets a livable wage. But the interesting thing for us is that California has already voted to raise the minimum wage to $15. That's happening regardless of what we do in Congress. So now, if you're going to listen to Congressman Knight's statements, if the higher minimum wage is making California less competitive, then he has no excuse not to support a federal minimum wage increase to put those other states on the same playing field as California. If he doesn't support a federal minimum wage increase, he's voting for other states instead of his own constituents.
Steve, that your response?
Well, I find it interesting that my opponent would ask for something that is directly going to hurt seniors. We know this. They have done countless studies on a $15 an hour minimum wage as hurting our seniors. We know that because of the services that seniors use. We know that of the retail that seniors use. And the studies have shown time and time again, if you raise it to $15, you will hurt the seniors. Now, the federal minimum wage is different than the state minimum wage, and I don't know if my opponent knows this, but a state minimum wage is on the level of the state. So $15 in Alabama is different than $15 in Hawaii. So that's why we have the two different. But $15 an hour just makes it less competitive and makes it more difficult to create opportunities for jobs.
Okay, thank you. And the next question, Brian, your turn. Local representatives have been working with the Bureau of Land Management on CEMEX for a number of years to avoid a massive mining operation in the east side of the Santa Clarita Valley. And now it's finally on the federal docket. If the current proposal doesn't fall through, what is the plan?
We need to make absolutely certain that the CEMEX mine never opens. And to me, that means we can't just leave it up to the whim of the executive branch. Right now, the BLM and President Obama's administration has made the right decisions, and it's moving through the process, and we'll see what happens. But who knows what the next executive will do? And that's why we need to have strong legislation that ensures that no mine will ever open. I have talked about this issue with our bordering members of Congress, Judy Chu, Brad Sherman, Julia Brownlee, Adam Schiff, and I'm proud that they support my campaign and have endorsed my campaign and are going to be ready and able to work with me on day one as we move in to make sure we have strong legislation that actually prevents this mine from ever opening.
Did you have a question for Stephen, or would you just like?
I guess the question would be with regards to CEMEX. Since you introduced your piece of legislation, Congressman, why have you not been able to move it through the process to actually get stuff introduced?
That is a great question. And if you would have lived here more than a month ago, you would have known the answer to that. But here is the answer. We've been trying to do things legislatively for the last about 8 years, and they haven't been working. And so when I got elected, I sat down with the city. The city has been doing the lion's share of the work on CEMEX. There is no doubt about that. There are certain people in Santa Clarita that know more about CEMEX than you'll ever know. But what we did was we sat down and we said, you know what the best idea would be is to try and get these contracts nullified. And that's exactly what we did. 8 months after I was elected, the contracts were nullified. That means there is no mine there. They cannot mine there. They go through an appeals process. This is America, so you do get an appeals process, and that's the process we're going through. If that fails, we do have legislation. But if you put the cart before the horse, then you might mess this whole thing up. It looks like we're going in the right direction, and we're 180 degrees from where we were just a couple of years ago.
And I think that's a very interesting answer that the congressman gave. He has introduced legislation, and so it has been introduced. If that's put in the cart before the horse, then that's what he did. But that legislation has sat there and gone nowhere, even while Republicans have a 60-vote advantage in the House of Representatives. This is yet another example where Congressman Knight likes to put out press releases, likes to talk about what he does, but actually isn't tackling those issues that really matter to the people in the community.
And since I was discussed, I would explain it to you if you come down to my office and you want to sit and talk about what happens in Congress. But introducing legislation is a vital piece to make sure that you have something there in the future.
Going to have to continue that at the district office. I want to talk about pay equality, which is something that's been, I've seen discussed in the groups, a couple different people. Women, on average, are earning 79 cents on the dollar for the same jobs in many instances that a man is doing. Does Congress have a responsibility to do something about this? And if so, what?
Well, I think so. I think when I was in the state legislature, there was an awful lot of different votes that were political kind of pandering from the Democrat Party. But when the real resolution came down, the real SJR about equal pay, I supported that. And I do support that. I think that there should be equal pay for equal job. But in Congress, we have to make sure that if that's going to happen, that we're not opening this up for attorneys just to make more money and to go out there and find every little problem that they can so that they can sue. And so I absolutely support equal pay for equal job, and I think my record's clear.
Okay, and again, you have the option of asking Brian your own question, or I can just throw the question at him.
Well, I think the question is, would you bring up legislation in Congress for equal pay?
Absolutely. Women must be paid the same amount as a man for the same job. California just instituted really great legislation on this. It recently took effect. We need to have something like that on the federal level. But we also need to recognize making sure that women have equality in the workplace is not just about equal pay. It's also about making sure that they aren't discriminated against. And so Congressman Knight actually recently co-sponsored a piece of legislation that would allow an employer to fire a woman who gets pregnant while single. That's outrageous. That's outrageous. He has also supported legislation that would allow an employer to fire a woman who uses birth control. That's also outrageous. So while we need to have equal pay for equal work, and I will fight for that legislation, we also need to fight for total equality in the workforce, because when women thrive, America succeeds, and Congressman Steve Knight's record doesn't show that he understands that.
Steve?
Yeah, I think that he is bringing two bills that had an awful lot of things involved in those bills. And again, here we have somebody who has never been a member of a club other than the Beverly Hills Bar Association and never been an elected official, and he wants to talk about bills that come through that have 47 things in them and pull one thing out. So if that is how this is going to go, then he will have all the ammunition in the world, because I have voted 10,000 times. There is no doubt. But I have also brought forward the issues that are very, very important to women. I am one of the co-authors of a bill that says that we should have rooms for breastfeeding in all airports across the nation. And I think that equal pay is also one of those issues. And I've been very, very clear on that.
Okay, Brian, what would be your first piece of legislation, assuming you can write your own ticket as soon as you get washed? What would it be if you were elected?
Sure.
Why?
Sure. First, I'm going to respond to that statement, which is, I pulled one thing out of 47. Well, here's a promise I make. If I'm facing a bill in Congress and one of the 47 or 57 or 157 things says that an employer can fire a woman for using birth control or for getting pregnant while single, then I'm going to vote against that, regardless of what the other 46 things are, because that is so important. We need to have women's equality in the workplace. That's how our economy moves forward. So if Congressman Steve Knight thinks it's okay to vote against women's equality in the workplace because there are 46 other things in the bill, then I think he is completely misguided in his approach. When I get into Congress, I am going to fight for legislation that defends women's health care, that defends women's equality in the workplace, and that is what I am going to start working on day one.
Spend another minute on this topic if you'd so like to address some of those claims,
so
Steve.
if one of those other 46 is not equal pay, then he would vote against that. I understand. If one of those other 46 was something that was helping women, he would vote against that. I get that. I just love it when people come and they have no idea, they've never run, they've never been a part of a club, they've never been a part of the district, and they say, I'm going to fight for you. Let's actually hear something. So, piece of legislation that we just introduced this last year was the Aeronautics Innovation Act. That brings a platform to Congress so that we can fund it year after year after year for aerospace, so that we can have hypersonic research, so that we can have a low boom supersonic demonstrator, so that we can have these things that create jobs and give us better technology, so that, you know what, in 10 years we'll be flying across this country in 2 hours instead of 5 hours. These are the types of things that we bring forward.
30 seconds to respond.
It's so interesting to hear the congressman just continue to make these false statements about when I moved, what clubs I've ever been a part of. I honestly have no idea what he's talking about. But, let's talk about where I was last week. I was invited up by the nurses at AV Hospital, which I think Congressman Knight's familiar with, in order to walk their picket line because they wanted someone who would stand with them. They are supporting me in this campaign because they are so disappointed by their elected officials refusing to stand with them. And I had a great day on the picket line fighting for the nurses at the AV hospital, just as I'll fight for everybody else in this community in Congress.
Steve, you indicated you wanted
I have a question
to reply to that.
Name one nurse at Antelope Valley Hospital.
So the person that I was coordinating with,
The person or a nurse?
All right,
the nurse,
let's stick
John Michael De La Serna, who's the lead nurse there.
That's the lead nurse.
The lead nurse of the union.
Let's make it very clear. The only reason he showed up was because my wife works at Antelope Valley Hospital. That's the only reason. He's taken this very personal. There is no other reason why he would show up.
Guys, let's go back to the questions. Steve, we have some topics I want to talk about, and we can you guys can go back on that in your own time. We only got an hour. California has a slate of gun control laws on the ballot. Steve, you've gone on record as not believing that stricter gun control will stop any crime. Do you think the federal government should be able to restrict states' limitations on access? As far as should the federal government be able to stop whether California continues to impede on what some feel are Second Amendment restrictions?
Well, let's understand the state of California has taken their position as taking away guns. And there is no doubt about that with the latest ammunition laws. They are trying to take gun ownership away. What I have said is if we are going to help out with the gun violence, and I think that the only one on this panel that has anything to do with this is me. I was a law enforcement officer with LAPD for 18 years. I've watched people die of gun violence. I have been there when people have taken their last breath after a gun violence, and I've seen this. And I know that we have to do some things that will change the gun violence in America. But what is happening right now is politics. There's no doubt about it. It is politics. Some people are espousing, I don't know if my opponent does this, but I would hope he would be more informed than this, of this no-fly, no-buy zone. If we're going to do that, then we're going to put 40 nuns on a no-fly, no-buy list. Let's actually talk. And after this whole campaign is over, I'm sure that people will really sit down and talk about lists or what we are going to do to try and curb gun violence.
Did you want to use the 30 seconds to ask Brian a specific question, or we'll go ahead and throw that question back at you?
Yeah, there are some very specific things we can do in order to start cutting into the senseless gun violence we face on a seemingly daily basis. So we need to reauthorize funds so research can be conducted in order to make sure we're implementing the best gun safety measures possible. We need to have better and more expansive background checks that are fully funded so that we're determining if a person is a suspected terrorist, a domestic abuser, or has mental health issues before they purchase a gun. We need to have waiting periods, which at the very least will reduce the number of suicides, which are all too often unspoken about when dealing with gun violence. And finally, we do need to pass no fly, no buy. If you are too dangerous to fly on a plane, you shouldn't be purchasing a weapon of war right down the street from our schools and community. And we can, and we have, the proposed bills have safeguards in place to make sure that due process is protected with no fly, no buy.
Steve, did you want to respond to him?
Yeah, I think that the Democrat candidate on the debate said it best, that these no-fly, no-buy lists, if they are the terrorists or people that are not United States citizens, are good. But this list is not. It does have about 30,000 people on there that didn't have the due process of law, that are United States citizens, that are nuns, that are teachers, that are all kinds of people that might have a name that is suspected or close to another person's name, and so they're on this list. So if you want to do a real list, then let's start off with the terrorists, with the non-U.S. citizens. Let's build the list from there. These people cannot buy weapons, and these people cannot do these dangerous things.
Thank you. Excuse me. Brian, we've talked about a lot of topics in the last 45 minutes or so, but what three issues do you feel are the most important facing the district in these next 2 years?
We've talked about this a lot, and I hate to be repetitive, but to me, ensuring women's health and women's equality is of absolute paramount importance. Because if we're going to have an economy that works for everyone, that includes 50% of the population. And that's why I will always defend women's health. I will make sure that women have equality at the workplace and are not discriminated against. We need to strengthen and secure Social Security and Medicare. And I've put forward in an op-ed on my website some very clear ways that we can fully fund these programs for decades into the future. Without having any cuts, without privatizing and giving a windfall to Wall Street speculators, and without ending the Medicare guarantee, as Congressman Knight has voted to do. And I think we need to pass comprehensive immigration reform. That affects a huge number of people in our community, and we need to get people in Congress who are going to fight for families and fight for all families.
Steve?
Well, do we live on the East Coast? Because my opponent just talked about what are the main priorities, and he didn't talk about water. I have a hard time believing that somebody in Southern California, somebody who has lived here, doesn't think that water is a priority. Water is the priority. It is the top priority for Southern California. If you're going to be a representative in Southern California or the Western states, and you do not say water in your first three priorities, boy, that just boggles me that you can't say that. Now, all of the other issues that come about, jobs, the economy, defense of this nation, there is no doubt about that. Those are top priorities. But we are representatives in Southern California, and if you do not say water, you are clueless about what is happening. Clueless about what's happening at the local level, the state level, the federal level. Why would you not say that?
Brian, you have 30 seconds.
There are hundreds of issues that are critically important for this community, for Southern California, for the state, for the country. We're talking about three big ones that are of critical importance. Of course, water is very important, and that's why one thing I want to do is make sure we're working to build large-scale water recycling facilities here in the district, which would help give us some much-needed water security that we don't have right now as we're dependent on the rain that doesn't come or Northern California water transfers. But what we didn't hear is anything about Congressman Knight's priorities.
No, I absolutely did. I said jobs, the economy, defense of this nation, and water.
Okay, and going to the last, I think this is probably going to be our time for our last question. And Brian, you mentioned healthcare a few times. But Steve, I want to ask you about the Affordable Care Act. Is it in need of a repeal, an overhaul, some tweaks, or are we okay?
Yeah, I think that the people that think that Obamacare is doing well are going to see in 2017 with some of the new mandates that it's going to have some severe problems, some severe changes to small business and to people that are on Obamacare. I've made no bones about that. I think that Obamacare should be repealed and replaced. We do have an idea to replace it. It does help out with competition. It does bring down rates quite a bit, and it does allow different types of coverages to come into play. But if you like Obamacare and you vote for Obamacare and you defend Obamacare, then you are absolutely going against Medicare, and that is a fact. Hundreds of billions, in fact, $750 billion will be taken out of Medicare for Obamacare. So if we're going to change that, and we're going to look at programs like Medicare Advantage, and we're going to look at how we can repeal and make this better, then let's do that.
And did you want to ask a separate question, or shall I direct the...
You can direct the same question.
It is interesting to hear Congressman Knight say he believes Obamacare, the Affordable Care Act, should be repealed. When he ran in 2014, he didn't say that. And he actually said the opposite. He said that he wouldn't vote to repeal it, he would try to fix it. And then he got to Washington and voted to repeal it time and time again. It is great that we have more people who have insurance coverage. That's a benefit. But it is true that costs are still far too high, and we need to take steps to try to bring those costs down. One thing we can do is allow the government to negotiate drug prices. That will bring costs down. Unfortunately, Congressman Knight opposes that. We can get rid of the medical equipment and the Cadillac tax. Those are things we can do to fix Obamacare, to keep expanding coverage so that people aren't going to be left out on a lurch when something happens, and that the cost will be lower for everyone as we move forward.
Steve, you have 30
just to be clear, just getting rid of the Cadillac tax will fix Obamacare. Okay, well, I understand now. And if you were there during those debates, I know you didn't live in the district at that time, instead of reading something that came out of that, you would have understood that I said several times during those debates that I would vote against Obamacare, but I would never bring it up. I would never bring up an idea that said we are going to take away Obamacare, but my vote would be, if it came up, that I would vote to repeal it. Now, I also said that we need to replace it. We can't just repeal it and then say, well, now it's gone, because people are used to this coverage. So if we're going to do that, we have to repeal it and replace it with something, and we do have those ideas.
Okay, gentlemen, thank you so much for your time. Now you will each have a minute closing statement, and as we determined beforehand, Steve, you will be going first. You have 1 minute to make your case for the voters of the 25th Congressional District.
Well, thank you, Perry, and thank you, KHTS, for, again, always being the voice of Santa Clarita Valley. I think that you've seen what we're going to see over the next few debates. We're both going to be talking about me. We're going to be talking about what I've done, what my vision is, and what I think is best for the district, because I've talked to the people in the district and I've actually lived here. I think that this debate or this campaign took a drastic change in the last couple of weeks when my opponent shows up at my wife's work that is outside the district, and he does this on a publicity stunt. I think that is just horrible. But of the 35 mailers that have been addressed at me, they have all been hit mailers, and I think that that's what we can expect, a venomous campaign. So in his closing, I'm sure he will talk about me. But as we move forward over the next 35 days, just understand, we told you we were going to work on small business, on aerospace, on veterans issues. We told you we would work in the district with the folks, and that's exactly what we've done. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Steve. And Brian, 1 minute to make your case.
I'm very proud to be endorsed by national nurses, California teachers, construction workers, grocery workers in the district. And I will always stand with those working families when they are standing up and fighting for a better way of life against corporations or Washington politicians who stack the deck against them. And I make no bones about that. That's why I'm running for Congress, to build a better economy that's going to work for everyone and not just the biggest donors, not just the wealthy few. We need people in Congress who are going to fight for women, who are going to defend women's health care decisions instead of trying to play doctor in D.C. and tell them what they can or can't do. We need people who will fight for equal pay and equal work. We need people who will strengthen and secure Social Security and Medicare instead of privatizing those or ending the Medicare guarantee. Thank you very much for the time, Perry, Congressman, and KHTS, and look forward to the next 5 weeks of the campaign.
Thank you both again for coming down and taking the time out of the campaign trail. I know we're going to be having a lot more conversation in the next few weeks, and we look forward to a great rest of the campaign.
Thanks, Perry.
This is KHTS News Director Perry Smith signing off for our 25th Congressional Debate on your hometown station, AM-1220 KHTS.